Thank you for being here today. I'm subbing for Dustin. The magnificent Dustin Myers has asked me to take his class. He's only mentioned good things about you, so I said, yeah, I think I can do that. But yeah, please excuse his absence. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, so we are kind of deep in the heart of the React jungle, and we're sort of figuring out how to navigate our way through the ecosystem of React. There's so many things to learn. Today, we are going to be taking a deep dive into composition patterns. So we'll start off by going over what that means. We'll figure out like what does it mean to compose code together. And we'll go over like some really just trivial JavaScripty examples. And then we're going to build something together from scratch that allows us to see this stuff come to fruition. So that way, when you see it in the instructions in your afternoon assignment, it's like, oh, I have a really good idea of how to approach this problem. And you'll probably be, pretty set up to build it from scratch if you really, really push yourself. The idea of abstraction is commonly seen in development. We love to be lazy as developers, but what that means is we love to build intricate parts of programs and then put those parts together so that we never have to do that again, right? The idea that programmers live their lives solving problems is really what you're getting into. Your life from now on, your career will be built around solving problems, whether that be for your work or your everyday life. We sort of break things down as engineers and we put things back together so that we don't ever have to do that again, right? And JavaScript actually lends itself really well to this paradigm, to this pattern, which is why we're going over higher order components today as a React composition pattern. Now, there's other composition patterns that you will see in the React world. In fact, the React's new hooks API is essentially just a great giant composition pattern, which is really cool. We don't teach that in the curriculum here, but Dustin is providing a cool workshop later on toward the end of the year on that, so stay tuned. But we are getting into the habit now of like seeing patterns. And so the reason that we have these patterns, like I said, is so that we don't have to repeat work later on. It's that we can do things that work really well, put them together, and compose things over and over again. And so you can start to think about your components as these little like displays of data, right? They're encapsulated pieces of DOM elements, and their job is to display data to the end user. So and we get a chance to compose those things together and make something beautiful. I love to use the analogy of composition in terms of like where you hear it in the real world, which a lot of us have heard it in terms of like composing a symphony. A symphony is you go to listen to a symphony, and you have all these tiny little parts moving together to create this amazing experience, this composition of music, right? And that's no different than what you do here. You're writing these symphonies, these programs that are little small parts put together that make up the bigger picture, the bigger whole, and allow users to interact with data. That's really what your job is in the front end world, is to allow users to interact with your data. So that being said, with that little like soapboxy thing, what kind of questions do you have for me about higher order components, or about pretty much anything this week? We can do a quick recap on things if we need to, or we can dive right into what we're going over today. You can use the questions answers thread to throw down your questions. While you do that, I'm going to take a drink of water. All right, so James has a good question. Today's project wants to pass classes in React. Yes, hopefully we will cover this. That's what higher order components are. So that's the topic for discussion today. And then Ben said, can you quickly go over the idea of functional set state really quick? Yeah, that's not a problem at all because I have a little project set up that'll let me do that really easily. So let me just share my screen. So functional set state is something that is sort of, how do I say this properly? Functional set state is another way to use the set state function in React. So the set state function is actually an asynchronous function, meaning, or it behaves asynchronously, meaning that it doesn't directly just go and take one version of state and directly swap it. There's things that happen along the way. And the idea that you'll be able to use set state in multiple facets forces you to understand when and where to use functional versus non-functional set state. So in this example right here that we're getting some users, and this is the example we're going to code along together today. We're just simply fetching some users from an API across the World Wide Web. It's going to give us 1,000 users back. And then we're mapping the data and then returning the new map data. And so in this then block, which you're going to learn all about this next week, so don't worry about it. But we have this set state function here. Now, in this case, passing a flat object to set state is actually very viable because at the time that these users are mapped, by the time we get these users mapped from the above then statement, we actually have an array of users where they're already done. So we don't need to wait for anything. We don't need to handle anything. But there's an interesting problem, and let's see if I can derive an example really quick, and then we'll call it good from there. There's an interesting problem with set state. Let's see. Oh, whoops. In that if I were to try and call it again, one or more of these things is going to actually be the thing that gets called. So if I call set state in multiple instances, the problem is that React will see this and it will ignore one or the other depending on when these things are served in the React engine, right? So when these things are executed depends on a number of things that we don't have control over. And so React gave us the ability to pass a callback to set state instead for instances like this. Now, this is totally a derived example, so don't worry about the intricacies of what's going on here. But this is just demonstrating that if you have an instance where you are effectively trying to wait on some value and then set state again, that's where you're going to get into trouble. So what we can do is we can pass a callback that makes this, that gives us the ability to, oh, now we need to add a function body. Sorry, that gives us the ability to look at the current copy. People call it previous state because if you're calling set state, you're going to update state again. But it gives us the ability to console log or to peek at the previous copy of state or the current copy of where it is at, right? Let's see if let's save that and refresh. See if I can get that to run. Oh yeah, there it is. So you see right here that users is effectively our empty array, okay? But if I were to open this up in the web browser, I have gone and set state. At the time that I console logged the previous state, it was empty, okay? And then set state goes and gets executed with that return value, and we have our list of 1,000 users, okay? So anytime, the rule is this, anytime that you need to reference the previous value of what's on state, use functional set state. Pass it a callback instead of a flat object, okay? Otherwise, just pass it the flat object. If you're just setting something that you know is there, all you need to do is give it that thing. Okay. Now I know that's still going to be confusing. I completely understand that and empathize with you on that. It took me years of working with set state to understand it a little bit more. Okay. Now there's a really cool Medium article by Justice Ma, and he wrote about functional set state. So if you want to see his non-derived examples, they're examples that actually make a little bit more sense, feel free to reference that. And Justice is awesome. He's got some great writing. So awesome. Let me check the channel a little bit further. Do we need to refactor our code today? A bunch of us are behind on MVPs because of the weird day break on Monday. Yeah. So Kai, that's a very good question. You can start your day today from wherever you're at, and it won't get in the way of this afternoon's assignment. Cool. So you should be good to roll. Okay. So yeah. Okay. Yeah, this stuff, folks, it's not easy. React has a steep learning curve, and that's a very specific reason. One of the specific reasons why we teach you React. The best part about learning React is that it's mainly just JavaScript. You don't get bogged down in opinions and structure and frameworks. You just get a library that has a really light API, and the rest is JavaScript. So it's a very steep learning curve for sure. Okay, here we go. We are going to learn about composition patterns. So let's take this opportunity to sort of just focus and dive in. You don't have to type along with me. In fact, I discourage that right now because this is just going to lend us to stuff that you have learned through training kits. So I'm going to clear this console. How do I clear? There we go. It's been a while since I've used Replit, so we'll take it one string at a time. Okay, so we're going to build a couple of functions here. Okay, so my first function is going to be like a function that takes in a string. All of these functions are going to take in and return a string. So I'm going to call it Yeller, Yeller, and that's going to return. And I'll just use a open body block, and I'm just going to say return string dot to uppercase. And if I were to call this function Yeller and pass it the old lambda rocks, like Fraggle Rock, and run that, we get a string that was uppercase and returned by our function, right? So it's pretty common to see, you know, one-off functions that do work, but it's also really common to see functions that can rely on the result of another function to be composed together into multiple cases, okay? So now what if I wanted to, I passed an exclamation point, but if I were to repeat that same thing but without an exclamation point, just imagine that you've never seen an exclamation point to this point, okay? So we run it, we got lambda rocks. So now we're gonna build an exclaim function. It's gonna take in a string, and it's going to return the string. We'll just use template literals here. It's going to return the string plus an exclamation point. Okay. So if I were to run this now and say exclaimer and give it that same string, run that, we get, just pretend like this one ran as well. It's just the log isn't showing up, but we get the added string to that. So we just passed it that string, okay? So two useful functions that we can use to manipulate strings, right? One way or another, we could potentially bind them together, which is going to be what we do here in just a minute. We're going to compose these functions together. So the last thing that I want to do is, what if we had a function that doubled the string, whoops, the string's return value, and it just set it twice. Okay, we'll run that and we'll invoke it. And once again, you're going to have to, in this console, you're going to have to pretend like, unless I console log them out, but you're going to pretend like all of those are working the way that we saw them work. It's only just printing out the last function call, which is fine for our purposes. So three useful functions that do three completely different things, but their input is exactly the same. Input is a string, okay? And it's going to take that string and either do an uppercase or exclaim it or double it. So what if we wanted to use these three functions in a way that allowed us to uppercase and exclaim and double what they do, or a single given string, okay? Well, we can do that with composition. Because we can pass functions around as arguments, Yeller is going to go and it's going to take in this lambda rock string. It's going to uppercase it and return it. So what is the result of Yeller getting passed into exclaimer? Well, exclaimer is going to take that result and it's going to do its thing to that string. So this string right here on exclaimer will become what gets returned out of here, which will be this, which in this case will be lambda rocks uppercased. Okay, let me delete this real quick so that we can prove that. Check it out. All right. Now, we could take that a step further. As many steps as we would like, we could take it all the way up the chain, and we get the result of all three of these functions on a single given string. Okay? So this is the idea of composition. This is why we do what we do, because we were able to combine the functionality of all of these things and just simply invoke them in turn. I want to draw this out. I want to show you what's going on here, just because we may be like, what the crap is going on? And that's totally normal. So initially, when we execute this, we're feeding this string into Yeller. Okay? And then this result becomes what is being passed to exclaimer. Okay? So then that we now have an uppercase string getting passed into exclaimer right here, exclaimer is then going to be invoked, and it is going to pass that down into doubled, because the result of whatever this is getting passed to doubled. It's not currying. Currying's a little different. Currying is the act of waiting for a function to do its thing and then passing that on to the next function invocation. This is just sort of composing functions together. I don't remember if this has a specific name, but very similar examples of this are given on courses over at Egghead.io by a dear friend of mine named Kyle Shevlin. So you can go check out what he has to say about this type of stuff. He loves this type of stuff. But it's a very common technique seen in functional programming. So this is the idea of what we're doing. We're not going to take it 3 levels deep. So imagine just executing or not executing one of these functions. We're basically going to take these and or basically take 2 examples, 2 pieces of code that do something, and pass them around to one another and compose them together in what we call a higher order component. So yeah, it's going to be really fun. Okay, now that I've had my chance to sort of go over that, let's dive into this code sandbox. And this is where you're actually going to follow along with me. So I'm going to go as slow as possible so that everyone can keep up. And we're going to build something together. So let me share this with you. Very true, David. Learning React will definitely make it so much easier to learn other frameworks or libraries that are out there. Last 10 minutes, totally understandable, super easy. Next 10 minutes, why God, why did you make React? Well, you're fine. We're fine. Just keep plugging away, Kai. You're doing great. Okay. So here we go. This little example is actually giving us a bunch of users that we're fetching across the World Wide Web. All this code, you don't need to worry about it. You're going to learn about that next week. Okay. Just know that as soon as component did mount finally finishes executing, we get a list of users on state. So we can pass those users around and build our little contact list. Now, I've provided a style sheet for us, so that way we don't have to worry about the stuff that's unimportant. Just kidding. Styling is totally important, and I suck at it, so that's why I say it's unimportant. But we're going to dive right in, and we're going to build a little contact list component that is going to take the users that we have on our state, and it's going to map over them and drill them down. If you want me to explain this code really quick, we get something back from an API call is what this is called, and we're mapping that to change the data and then returning that data into our next function, which will then set that on state. So that's a high-level example or definition of what's going on here. So each user should have a name, email, and a thumbnail image that we can use to build out our contact list. Okay? So let's go ahead and in our SRC, so you should all have this pulled up, and you should click on New File. And we're going to call that contact list.js. Of course, as with every single React component that we ever will create, we need to import React from React. And this is just going to be a stateless functional component. Its only job is going to be to return a contact list. Axios is a data fetching library. It's an API library. You're going to learn all about it next week. Next week is 2 days on React Router, 2 days on Axios. So don't worry about it for now. What is the difference between a framework and a library? A framework comes with ample opinions and style. A library is just sort of a list, a set of API calls, APIs that you can use to build things in whatever way you'd like. Frameworks force you to build things in their way. Ember, Backbone, Angular, they're all frameworks. They force you to put things together. Sorry, Kai, you have the week off next week. 2 weeks, you're going to learn about Axios. 2 weeks from today will be your Axios day. Thanks for correcting me on that. Okay, so contact list is going to take in some props, is going to return some DOM. I'm going to use this fancy little faker syntax, which is just a fragment. It's built into the Babel 7. Babel 6 probably had it, but basically you can use this as a way to not add a bunch of divs that are unnecessary to your code. Okay, so it comes from React. It's just like an empty JSX element. It's like, I want to treat this as a special thing. So do that. And it allows us to just write sibling elements or like write some inline JSX. And then we're going to, in here, I guess there's a special way to comment out. Nope. In here, we're going to write out our list of elements. So this is just placeholder for now. Let's say list of contacts. So this is going to be our array of contacts. Okay. And then, of course, like with everything, we want to export default contact list. Ugh, I hate that auto formatter sometimes. Okay. So hopefully there's no questions that I have neglected to this point. Okay. So we're going to map over a list of users that we're going to pass to this contact list and show them on the same or on the screen. Is there a reason that export default on the const on the same line? No reason. I think you could. I think you're fine. Well, if you do it that way, it's not gonna be the default, but Sean's saying export contact list equals props, as opposed to exporting the default, and then you'd have to import it the specific way. But in this case, we're just going to export it as a default, and I think versions of Create React app give you linting warnings for that, for one reason or another. But I think you can turn those warnings off. So. Okay, so we're going to take this list of users, which have a name, email, and thumbnail image. We're going to add them to the DOM. And the way that we do that, of course, is by using one of the built-in array methods. Which one have we been showing you to use? Does anyone remember? To return us a new array. Yeah, we're going to map. So we're going to say props.users.map. For each user, let's build some DOM. Now I have a bunch of styles classes that are already put together for this project. So we need to import that style sheet from styles.css, not CSS. Okay, so that way we can add the class name of, we're going to just call this, what do I want to call this? What was this one? Contact container. Of course, since it's going to be an innumerable amount of items, we don't know the number. We need to tell React to have a specific key. And the name that we get is going to be unique for every user because it's a combination of their first and last name. And I've already looked at the API and know that it's not going to return anything other than that. And then let's test this so that we don't write too much code without moving forward. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to make sure that your screen looks a lot like mine so that we can move forward. And if anyone has any questions while we're sitting here and waiting for just a couple minutes, feel free to ask them. These follow along exercises, they're meant to give you the opportunity to dive deeper on things that you've previously learned. So you get a chance to see this stuff in action and actually physically type it out. So that's the idea here, is hopefully you're typing along with me. You get a working solution by the end of the morning. No questions. We'll come back to this file in just a second. So if you're not fully caught up, Don't worry about it. I'll open that file back up. But first, we're just going to import in our contact list from contact list. And then we're going to use it like we do with every single React component that we use, and make sure that we supply it that list of users that it demands. Okay, so app is the parent of contact list, which will receive a list of users and then generate those users on the fly for us. Doesn't like what just happened. Let's go figure it out. Cannot read. Okay, okay. I like it. So this is fun because you can kind of see where the breakdown happened. App called this div contact list created by app. Okay. Cannot read property map of undefined, which means that I have a problem. I need to go back to app and fix my typo. How come none of you called me out on that? I'm sitting here pair programming in front of you, with you. Not one of you said, Ryan. Just kidding. It happens. You're not to blame. I was the one who introduced the bug. So now we should get, ooh, still getting errors? Interesting. Gotta love debugging. It's always a good part of the experience. Ah, they did encounter two children with the same key. Andreas Peterson. So keys should be unique. So there's one way we can make these unique. And the way we can make these unique is by adding an index as well. Because remember, map gives us not only the data, but the index where it was found. So we can then say username plus, and we'll just stringify it. We can concatenate together. Index, which is going to be where the item was found. So that way, if we do have two test cases, they're all there. So what is test? Test is just placeholder text. Yeah. Math.random would have done the trick as well. Most likely. It's a very odd chance that out of 1,000 users. Okay, so we're going to finish our little project here, our little list, by instead of rendering placeholder text, we're going to render some data. So I'm going to add an image because there is an image thumbnail on every single user whose SRC is going to be set equal to user.thumbnail. It's an easy one to misspell. Just be careful. And then we'll give it an alternate ID of user thumb for accessibility purposes. So now I save that. It should refresh. And after it goes and fetches 1,000 users, it's taking a minute, taking a minute. This is why we're building a higher order component today. There, you see the users came. They were there for a minute. I probably need to put my class name on this. So make sure you add the class name of image, because there's a class for that. And you can see we get all of our random images. That was better. So that's probably what was going on, is I was missing some good styles for those images, and they were there, but they were hidden. So here's our list of 1,000 users, all of their thumbnails. Cool. I'm wondering why they're not rounded though, because I added a radius to that, I thought. Interesting. Let me open that up. These should look a little better. Image is a thing. Importing styles.css. They are round for you. It's weird as heck. Maybe I'm just in like a weird state of all these things. There they go. Wow. Okay, cool. I love the problems that you get with like all these. I have Slack, which is a web app, Zoom, which is using similar technologies as Slack, and then Code Sandbox, which is very heavy on the browser. So awesome. Took about 90 seconds for them to show up. Yes, that's about right for a lot of processors. This is a list of 1,000 users. If you feel like it's just going to take way too long, you can actually go and modify the amount of users that you're getting back inside the componented mount. You can change this 1,000 to 500 or something. I'm doing it so that we can see a good example of why we're using a higher order, why we will be using a higher order component today. Okay. When all else fails, just F5. Nice. Okay, we're going to now take this information and we're going to create a container for the contact info. Where we then have two divs, one whose class name is contact name, and set that equal to user.name. And the other one whose class name will be contact email, whose data will be user.email. Save it. We'll do a refresh. Man, that's slow. This is bad UI. I'm gonna change my, I'm gonna limit my search or my API call to 500 users and see if that speeds things up with all of the, like my fan is just flying right now. So if we crash, sorry about that. Ooh, I just got one console error. Why? Why is Code Sandbox giving me so much trouble today? What in the world? I wonder if we're all using this API. And it's rate limiting all of us. My guess, instead of overloading Code Sandbox, is that we're overloading the API. Everyone keeps getting the same error. The data is there. the question came in as to whether or not if I change it to 500, if it's also getting still waiting for the list of 1,000. Is it, you know, the asynchronicity of it? No. Refreshing the page would have like canceled that request. Like you just would have stopped communicating at that point. So stop making requests to the API for now. Go ahead and dang, what I need to do, give me a moment. What I'm going to do is, shoot, I need to like give you all a JSON file. The Star Wars API won't necessarily work. I mean, it would potentially work, but like I tried to do this on a slow API for a reason. That error is actually coming from the network. So here it is. Yeah, we broke it. Dang. Okay, give me a second. Go ahead and take a break. We'll come back since we broke our API, and I will have a JSON file that we can shove into our projects. Thanks. That's exactly what I was going to do, James. Hopefully it works. There we go. Okay, that should be enough users, so we can go ahead and this is my fault for using a public API. Don't do anything. If I were you, I would just go take a break and come back in just a moment. We'll take we'll time it. We'll do a 5-minute break. All right, welcome back. I'm still not fully out of the weeds with this. But yeah, I think we just got rate limited on their API, and that's not a good thing to ever have happen when you're doing a live demo. So let's I dumped an array into a code snippet inside of the Slack channel. So we're gonna go ahead and try this. I'm going to clean up my app a little bit by simply commenting this stuff out really quick. We're going to need this stuff in a minute, but just bear with me. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file. Let's call it data.js. And then I'm going to copy and paste that file that I put into Slack into this file. Dang it. So if you downloaded that, data.js.js, nice. Okay. Just open it with VS Code or something. Oh, all of a sudden your stuff works now, Kai? Of course. Works on my machine, right? Now I'm just freezing the browser here. Here we go. Let me terminate some processes over here on this end. I have a bunch of tabs open. Okay. All right. Now that we're a little bit cleaner, this might actually just work. So what I'll do is I'll save this document, and then I'll send you the link that you can click on. So you can close your code sandbox links for now. And I will share this back again with you. And you should be at a place where you could follow along. Yeah, you're reading that right. Okay, so go ahead and close the code sandbox that you were just working in and open up the new one that I just pasted in Slack. And you should have, to make sure that it's a new one, you should have a data.js file. Okay. So now that we have gone and refactored our data, we need to loop over that data. Yep, exactly, David. We need to loop over that data and create a new data set based on the data given. So go ahead and import data from data.js. And we actually need to export it too. So go ahead and, well, just at the top or the bottom of the file, whichever one you can get to faster, export. If you export, well, just do it at the bottom. Export default data. There we go. And that's just going to take forever because there's so many records in that. Imagine a database that does this way faster than a freaking web browser. That's what we were trying to do, but then we were ruining the traffic of the API by requesting too much to it, overloading it. We got what's called rate limited. It's like, hey, there's been too many requests from this browser. Okay. So now we're going to take this little algorithm and copy and paste it. See if prettier will work for that. The import was import data from data. The export was at the very bottom, export default data. And my computer is just being way too slow. Okay, so it doesn't want, oh, there is no data.results. So it's just data.map. I don't know why this isn't formatting for me. Oh, it's that big of a file. Jeez Louise. The code generator has de-optimized the styling. Okay, we're back to square one. All right. Okay, so stop following along if your computers are heating up. I'm sorry about the bad API example. I'm going to get you code that works. I don't know why this is so malperformant, but I'll get you code that is, and we'll get it to work. So, yeah. So I'm just going to say const new users equals data.map, and then what we'll do is we'll call this.set state on the users of new users. What I should do, truthfully, is run this algorithm over the data set, get that result, and put it into this file. So when I give you this code back at the end of this lesson, what I'll do is I will optimize it for you so you can use it and take it into your afternoon. Okay. So if you're having computer issues, like stop following along. I mean, I'm having computer issues too. So but there we go. We got our users back. Okay. So now that we're ready to roll, I'm going to go back into contact list. And yeah, we have our users. Everything should be good to go there. But it takes a while for those users to kind of load. Well, it's not going to take that long anymore. Dang it. It's going to take long to build the freaking app, but it's not going to take long to load the users, which was like the reason to do this in the first place. So, but what we're going to do is we're going to build a little loading screen. So the idea is that when we actually go and get the users, we want to show something that tells the user that's interacting with the data that their contact list isn't there yet, and that it will be there in just a while. Okay. So to salvage this little demo, that's what we're going to build towards. We're going to do that. So for that, I need to actually build a higher order component. Okay. But I hate that this is all like rooting your computers and stuff. And we've kind of crashed and burned for the last little while, even with a break. So why don't we take our top of the hour break that we normally would have taken now. And then I'll get this all set up so that it works a lot better, a lot more efficiently. And then we'll jam out after. Okay. So the big stuff is coming. The stupid issues should be over. Many apologies about the demo. That's just what happens sometimes. Okay, go take a break. Come back at the end of the timer, and we'll finish this awesome project. Okay, we're gonna begin here in just a few seconds. Um, I have decided that I will make sure that I not only get this working and publish to Code Sandbox, but I'm also going to dump it up into GitHub, so that way you can check out the source code there for this project. Sometimes, folks, demos crash and burn. Um, I was at React Rally last August, which is a conference here in Salt Lake, and I had the opportunity to watch Ryan Florence's demo burn on stage. And he didn't have a bunch of people, like, he just had a bunch of typos in his code. Eventually he found it after the 30-minute presentation. But yeah, I chatted with him after, and I'm like, I can't tell you how many times, like, I've had demos for students just go and fail on stage. It's not easy. So he empathizes because he's a teacher as well. But I want you guys to understand that the problems exist because of stuff that we're doing, cross-browser experiences and stuff like that. But the main gist of what we need to pull together today is this last part that I need to go over. So don't try and follow along with me because I don't want to run into issues again. I am hitting the API again, but only requesting 100 users. And I'm going to be very conscious about refreshing my page so that I don't crap out the API again. So, yeah, if you're using a better operating system with higher power, that's great. My Mac isn't super old. It's got 16 gigs of RAM, should be able to handle this type stuff, but it's one of the older 2015 models. So, okay, let's figure out why all of this crashing and burning is actually important right now. We're going to build a higher order component, okay? And a higher order component is what? Like, who can give me one sentence to describe what a higher order component is? Think about it for a second. Kai asked, do I think the problems exist with the Axios call? Yes, it's because, so the network was giving us timeout issues because we were all hitting it too much, and my computer was hitting it a lot because of Code Sandbox. So yeah, it is because of the Axios stuff, but it's not because of Axios itself, it's because of what we're doing. Grace said a higher order function takes in a callback component. Yeah, very much takes in a component, returns another component. Yep. So essentially a good definition that I've heard of a higher order component is, just like in JavaScript, higher order functions are functions that take in functions as arguments. So a higher order component is a component that receives a component as an argument. Okay, or it's a function that receives a function as an argument, because functions and components are synonymous. React uses functions. A class, the class keyword, it's just a function. It's a constructor function under the hood. And so everything we're doing is working with functions. This is just a function with some fancy syntax to decorate it up a little bit with the class, extends, etc. And we use syntax specifically around classes to tell JavaScript that we're working with a class, but it's a function. So we can pass stuff to it, or we can pass this around since it's defined as an argument, because that's one thing that's cool about JavaScript is that functions can be treated as first-class citizens, meaning we can pass them around as variables, as arguments. So a higher order component is a component that receives another component as an argument, and then it will augment that component that it receives, maybe change its props, do something to it, and then return that component based on whatever you need to do to it. So we're going to treat contact list as a first-class citizen. We're going to pass contact list to a higher order component that we build. Because right now, and this is going to be one of those times where I sparingly refresh my browser. Right now, when I refresh the page, it takes a minute for those 100 users to come, get mapped over, changed, and then display to the page. It takes a little minute. So that's not good for users, because that little split second of time, it looks weird. It feels funny. So what we want to do in the interim, before we have this list of users back from the API, is show a little spinning GIF. And we're going to use a higher order component to do that for us. So I'm going to open up a file, and don't follow along because I'm going to try and get through this fast. I'm going to call this loading hoc.js. I'm going to import React. I'm going to declare this. And this is going to take in our, what do we want to call this? Component, whatever we want to call this, we can call it wrapped component. Normally you see a convention where higher order components are lowercase, so we'll just keep that convention. Otherwise, Dustin, I think, will have my head. But this component's job is to return a React class, okay? Because we're gonna control some state or some props or something, and we're going to return an anonymous class out of this component, okay? Which will then either mount the wrapped component or our little loading GIF that we have in our assets file. So we have a little loading spinner. You can see what that looks like. That's what we're going to mount there. Okay. So we need to return, and this is where the syntax gets really weird because you're like, why are we returning class extends react.component? Well, I don't really care to name this class. It doesn't need to have a name. You probably could name it for debugging purposes later on and feel a little bit better about it. But for me, I'm just demonstrating that you don't have to. Okay. But now, because we're extending React class, the React base component, what does that allow us to have access to? What does that give us? Well, it would give us access to all of the lifecycle methods. It would give us access to state, but also we're going to be wrapping up our wrapped components. So we're going to have props as well. Okay. So because this is a React class, what's the one vital method we need to have inside of our React class? We need to render. That was so fast. Yasira, you're like, I feel like you had render typed out already. You just were waiting for me to say it and you hit enter. Wonderful. So yes, we have to render from this class. We have to render something. React requires that. Okay. But what we're going to render in this case, what we're going to return is a conditional. A condition where the props are, the users on props length are 0. Awesome. James is following along in his own way. Cool. I was just making sure that you, it's like looking at that code snippet. Okay. So we're going to return a conditional statement where we say this.props.users.length, and we're going to say, hey, JavaScript, is that equal to 0? And this is what a ternary operator does for us. The thing that's left of the question mark is going to be evaluated as if it's in a conditional. So if I were to kind of pseudocode this out, basically what I'm saying right there is this.props.users.length equals 0. Whoops. And then if that's true, then the next thing, do something. Else, do something else. So this can be represented by this ternary statement. So I can say this.props.users.length is equal to 0. If that's true, then what we want to do is render our div with the class name of GIF container. That's going to wrap our image, our GIF image. And I just wrapped it in a div so it looks a little nicer. Gave it some styles. And this is going to be set to GIF image. Remember, I built styles earlier, so don't worry about where I'm getting these things. But we need to pull in our image and set it on the source. And because we're using Code Sandbox, which uses Create React App, we can just simply import images, which I say that like nonchalantly, but that's a huge deal, folks. And we're going to render, or we're going to pull in that assets GIF. Okay, so, but we need a condition. We need to match this other else condition. Because right now we're saying, hey, if this .props.users.length is 0, if there's no users to display yet, then render this div. Else, render our wrapped component. And then make sure that we give it our users equal this.props.users. Let me comment this out so you have that and prettify the file. Okay, maybe it'll actually prettify it. I guess it looks decent. Oh, must have an alt prop. Okay. Okay. So this is the composition that we were talking about. We're building a function that can receive another function as an argument. Okay. And then because we're in the React world, we can just simply extend React and render some stuff to the screen based on the props that we'll be receiving. Whoops. Okay. So now we need to treat this contact list with that higher order component. So I'm going to import it. Loading hawk. And I want to lowercase it. There it is. And then to extend the functionality of contact list, all I need to do is compose it. So loading hawk will now receive contact list and mount that when the props aren't 0. A little bit nicer, right? All right, I see some memes coming through. What kind of questions do you have for me about this pattern? And are you bogged down about ternary syntax? Because I can go over that. Loading hawks right here. I could have very well represented this with a conditional. right? Let me grab this. Oh, return. And if there's no errors, it should just do the same thing. That's a very good question, Dennis. How is props getting passed into this component? Okay. Well, let's remember what this component looks like. What are we exporting here? We're exporting a wrapped component. How are we using that wrapped component? Oh, right here. So by the time we get down to mounting contact list, it is wrapped up with the loading HOC, and it has access to whatever we pass to it. James said, I'm trying to see how this ties into to the way our project today has us designing our files. So let's take a dive over there. And let's look at day 3's assignment. Day 3 has you building a higher order component. So notice that the setup for day 3 you don't need to have everything working to work on the higher order component this afternoon. You're going to be building a higher order component that won't let users see the posts until they have logged in. Our login system is going to be faked using something called local storage, which we can go over in 5 minutes this morning. It won't take long to go over that. But yeah, if you follow the instructions, your higher order component should look a lot like this. And then it's like, I want to either return the app or the login page, whichever is necessary, depending on a condition. Okay. So that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be building a fake login page. Yeah. And that fake login page will be conditionally checked by way of higher order component. Okay. But notice how this little ternary is a little different than this, right? Yeah, contact list. The only thing that actually changed on contact list was how we're exporting it and then importing the high order component. Kai asked if we're still a bit behind styling and a few of the components, will we be okay to make the login page? Yes. And the reason is, Kai, is tomorrow you're going to be learning some styling techniques that are really cool with React. And so you're going to be spending the whole day tomorrow just styling your app, finishing up anything you got. Okay. I'm pausing right now to kind of let things sink in and let you guys ask whatever questions. Hopefully this isn't the first time you've seen this. Hopefully you looked through Training Kit, went through the videos. There's only a couple videos for this section. And the high order components video kind of shows you a different example that's similar to this one. The contact list displays different people because it's randomized. It's just what the API gives us back. David, I'm not sure what you mean by making a phishing site. Hopefully, you're not building phishing attacks. Okay. Where is image coming from? Isn't it just a GIF? Yeah. So image is a file inside of our code sandbox. It's this right here. And you can grab it and export it and import it. It's in the loading. Just like this. Import image from the file. And it React Webpack knows how to read this. Webpack is what generates this, like the ability to do all these things. So you're saying we're mimicking. I gotcha. Yeah, you could mimic a lot of things. That's the hope if you get good enough. But obviously, we want you to use your powers for good. What David is talking about is people who go out and build like Google forms that look just like Google login forms, and then they get people to log in, but they're giving them their credentials and information. So Eileen asked, do you always have to name the image you're importing? Yes, I believe you want to do that. Yes. Because then you're basically giving this a reference. This is not much different than saying const image equals something. But with import export syntax, you're basically saying, const image from whatever is found in this file, right? So it's like you're creating a reference and assigning it what that object will be. And in this case, GIF is kind of treated like an object in that it gets stored on the image variable, and we're just using the image variable right there. Could we have done animated CSS instead of a GIF? Absolutely. You could have changed this into some animated CSS. I know you are all way better with CSS than I am because you were taught by Josh. And Josh is incredible. Stephen asks, how can we test the length of users if props are only called after the wrap component is passed? I see where you're coming from with that. But remember in our little replet that the first function was waiting for the return of the other functions, right? So the function that was farthest on the left, where is that replet? I wonder if it's not Reddit, replet. Two hours ago. Okay. So remember that exclaimer is essentially awaiting the value here because it knows it's a function. Okay. So exclaimer will be invoked after we get a return value out of this. So it's very similar to how contact list is being treated. So loading Hawk will know all about contact lists props because it's as if it's kind of waiting for that to kind of return. So let's try and stay on track here a little bit while I'm trying. Oh, you got it, Stephen. Okay, go. We were on track. I was overemphasizing. Show your password. It's cool. All Slack passwords show up like this. Cool. Credit card info for science. Nice. Not going to happen. I record these videos. I don't have time to edit them all. Okay, so essentially so you kind of have to take this like tongue in cheek because it's like, oh yeah, we're, composition is simply kind of passing a function, waiting for it to return to do its thing. That's not necessarily exactly what's happening here because it's treated specially like by React. But yes, what's the return value of this contact list? Well, it's getting fed props. So the props are just going to be there because by the time we get to loading component, it's going to have access to those props, which is so freaking cool. All right. So once you start like seeing these patterns and playing around with them, things start to get a lot more fun because it's like, oh yeah, I could kind of compose this stuff together. And we wrote this little loading component, and wrapped component could virtually be anything, right? If we wanted to wait for um, the user's news feed or whatever. I don't know what else a user is going to use in this little app that we're building, but maybe this is their contact list and they have like a list of like favorite friends or whatever. We go and fetch that data and load that information. We could do the same thing, You could make sure that users is the same data, or like you could just make this more robust or whatever and reusable. You could use prop types to check the users to make sure you're getting the data you need, right? So many things you could do with this loading component, but it's reusable now. Anywhere else we want to render something, if you wanted to use Star Wars users, whatever, it would just work. But the wrapped component becomes our contact list, and that's what's important here. And it's only going to show up when it's only going to mount to the screen when that condition is met. Okay. So I mentioned that I would show you the local storage API, which is important to understand for this project today. So local storage, JavaScript, and we don't have training kit material on it. We just haven't gotten around to finishing that or putting that objective together. But notice that the window.local storage is a part of the window object in JavaScript. Okay. So bear with me for 5 minutes because this does not take long to go over. But it's an object that we can use to set and retrieve items from the browser, from the browser's storage. Inside of application, there is a local storage key value pair system. It's a little database, if you will. And we can write and read from that little database. So there's three functions that you can call. So write these down. 3 functions you can call when working with the local storage API. You can say set item, which is a setter. It's going to take a key and a value. Okay? And this could be any key. If I run that function and go over to application, this is how you test to see what's there. You can see it visibly. Some key has been stored as value. Okay? Let's go back to the console and do it again. I want you to actually open up your Chrome console and do this with me. I want you to set a key of name and a value of your name, your first name. Wait, but weren't we doing something like this with our stateful components by importing them? Is this just a little more formalized? Trying to dissect the question. The idea is that this is a new pattern. Higher order components is a new pattern. So it's something that you haven't done yet, but you will be. Okay. All right, Lydia is good to go. So go ahead and type in local storage.set item, name, and the value of your name. Once you do that, click on the application tab and notice that you have a little key value pair that are there. I get what you're meaning now, Kai. So that's mainly just the parent-child component relationship in React. This is physically the act of taking a component and passing it to another component as a function and extending that component's functionality. So they're similar, but one is actually receiving a component as an argument. Okay. All right. So I mentioned there are 3 methods we can use on this local storage API. The other one is a getter, which only takes the string argument of the item you want to get, and guess what it's called? Get item. So what's cool about this is this function returns me the value that's found at the key in the object. Would the local storage variable go into our higher order component or the app that is being rendered? Shai, I want you to think about that. Because that would, I mean, it could go on either place. You could physically type it in either place, but where does it belong? Think about that for a few minutes. If we're going to be building a login system, so this is kind of the idea here. Let me clear this for a second. We can do other stuff on it later. But if we're going to be building a login system that's an input form, okay, here's our little input form. It says username, and just type in useless passwords. There's no reason to worry about security for now. We're going to take that information, username, cool. This is going to be on set state, right? Or set on state. So my name's Ryan. I type that into the input field. So this is the actual browser, and then this is my little delightful implementation of what the code kind of would look like, the data. We're going to pass that through the web browser. We're going to call this Chrome. And store it in the web browser's database. It's like this little, it's like the de facto, I don't know why. But we're going to store that information there in the database. And then we're going to have a component that's going to say, oh, is this user actually stored in the browser? If that user is in the browser, then load our data. Okay, our other components, our app, else load the login page and make the user login. So that's the process here. That's what you're building. This is the little requirements. I said Chrome, not Chrome. Nice. These are little requirements for your project this afternoon, is to build this higher order component on top of your application that's going to also have a login page that sets a user in local storage. And then your higher order component ought to be checking if a user is in local storage, and if they are, then mount the app. Otherwise, mount the login page. So if you can kind of start to conceptualize that based on what you've learned today, it should look a lot like this. However, the check is a little different. Okay. So the last thing that you want to look at because you're going to build a little log out button, is local storage dot remove item. And if I look at application, my item should be gone. I'll do the same thing with some key. It's gone. Okay. For more information and more ability to play around with local storage, see the documentation, set item, my cat is Tom, get item, my cat, we'll give you Tom. And the cool thing is you can do this right in React. So if I have component did mount, check for local storage, and I save that and refresh it. Whoops. And I check the application, check the local storage, foo and bar are in memory. If I set it again, it'll override it. Foo bar. Okay. If I remove item, whoops. It'll remove it. So you can do this right inside of React, which is really, really nice. Remember how I said React is pretty much just JavaScripts? Okay, so I already answered that, or I didn't answer that specifically. Nick said that's weird. I couldn't get that to work in the Google homepage. Yeah, I'm wondering if you're making sure that you're typing it directly into the console. I don't know why my console is all formatted weird. I know that I'm zoomed in 1,000. But yeah, you should be able to just type in local storage right there. Okay, questions before I turn you loose? While questions are coming in, if any are coming in, I want to emphasize to you that React is a new technology. However, a lot of the patterns that we use in React aren't necessarily new to programmers in general. You know, we see things and we start composing things and putting things together. People start getting hype over it and then figure out why it's a bad idea 10 months later. But there's patterns. And it's very important to understand that the main purpose of React is that all of your views are driven by the state or the data that they need to be concerned with. So if I'm going to go to this GitHub README, what is the data on this page that I need to be concerned with? Well, it's the ability to navigate through this repository, to work with this application and change things and manipulate things. GitHub is a huge application. It has tons of data, and we interact with that data on a daily basis. I'm not necessarily saying that GitHub uses React. I know they've been Ruby on Rails shop forever, but I do know that there's the same patterns that would exist for the GitHub organization exist for anyone building an app in React. And the patterns are taking that data and turning it into a well-crafted and well put together user experience. Okay. So that's a big part of what you do as a front-end developer. How do I drive what needs to be on the screen? Well, you're going to get some sort of mock-up from a designer that says this thing needs to look this way. But if that designer knows nothing about what data you have access to, it's more than likely you're going to get features that don't even exist within the realm of possibility of your application. So you're going to be building projects. You're going to be working in teams. You're going to be talking with your designer and your backend developer. And React is really, really good at using that data to drive the view of the user. And so that's what, if you ever hear that term of state-driven views, React, that's what it was built for. It's a component library built to mount up views based on the data that it is presented with. And you will find that there are so many different patterns out there for you to tap into to compose these things together. And higher order functions is one of those that's so popular and so giant and built into other things that you're going to be using next week that you're gonna really want to kind of at least have exposure with it. Okay. So hopefully that explains why we're teaching you what we're teaching you today and why you're working on this little login system today. Granted, it's going to be a fake login system. Don't go advertising to your friends that you know how to build a authentication system that's secure, because that would be detrimental, and I don't want to be held liable for saying that that you have all that skill. That skill is usually much bigger than what we do. That's for backend. We teach you a little bit more about authentication, security in the backend. Do we have some basic code to reference for today, at least for the login part? Or we're gonna have to figure it out on our own. So the login part is just a form that's gonna set something into local storage from state. So you're gonna have to figure that part on your own, but that's basically a to-do list that you hit submit, and once you hit submit, it goes into local storage. Okay. And then once it's in local storage, figure out a way to refresh your components. So those are things you're gonna have to figure out with. It's basically just a to-do list that stores a username on state in local storage. Sorry. This I'm gonna clean up and get you access to before the end of lunch. Okay. Actually, I'm gonna leave this here and I'm gonna type that back out. Yeah, exactly. And that's going to be your login page. And then your higher order component needs to read from that local storage. I'll give you this so that you know how to do the higher order component really well and check, conditional on that. Mount one thing or the other based on, literally, you could change this line of code right here and change this to a component and this to the wrap component, and you'd be good to go. So wrapped component would be your app, your entire app. So you'll follow the instructions in the README. They're pretty well written out. Exactly what James just said is the algorithm. So this would be login page. This would be your data, your app. Cool. So yeah, and you'll find all the instructions in the README. It breaks it down. It's like, hey, first go ahead and create a post page. You'll have to move a lot of what's rendered in app.js to this new component. In app.js, render the post page component. Make sure the app is working as it was before you refactored this now. Then ensure that we clean up app component a little bit before we refactor it to be wrapped up in the higher order component. Create a directory called authentication. Inside that directory, create a component called authenticate. That's your higher order component. Okay. And we're fine if you pair program on this stuff, guys. Feel free to jump into pairs, to groups, to get the reps. But make sure that if you're pairing, both of you are typing stuff. Both of you are programming. Okay. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been my pleasure teaching you today. I'm sorry about the rocky start with the API getting flooded. That's definitely my bad. I should have thought about that beforehand. I know Dustin is working hard at building a bunch of APIs for these types of projects that we can one day use in the future. But those aren't ready yet. And so I went for a different experience. If you need anything at all, reach out to your PMs, your section leads, to Dustin or myself. I believe he is working this afternoon. But yeah, let us know if you need anything. Have a great day.